You ever have that feeling, that deep frustration? You spend hours studying for a test, or maybe you're trying to learn a new skill for work. You pour your heart into it, only for it to completely vanish the next day. It just feels like your brain is a leaky bucket, right? Well, what if I told you there's a better way? A way to learn smarter, not just harder. Let's dive in. We all know that one person, the one who just seems to get it. They look so relaxed. They seem to study way less than everyone else, but they remember everything and just face the test. So what is their secret? Is it some kind of smart gene? Well, according to science journalist Benedict Carey, the answer is a big fat no. It's not about having a better brain. It's about using a better strategy. For most of our lives, we've been told the person on the left, the hard worker, is the hero. Long hours, brute force, highlighting everything in sight. But if the person on the right is getting better results with way less stress, it really makes you wonder, what did they know that the rest of us don't? Today, we're going to uncover the science that can turn any of us into that smart learner. So first things first, we have to talk about something called the effort trap. This is the belief that learning is kind of like weightlifting, that the more brute force you apply, the stronger your memory gets. But that's based on a total misunderstanding of how our brains actually work. Harder isn't always smarter. And this is where Benedict Carey, in his book How We Learn, just flips this whole idea on its head. He says that real effective learning isn't some chore you have to suffer through. It's actually a strategic game you can play with your brain's natural tendencies. And once you learn the rules of that game, everything changes. So here's the crucial thing to understand. Your brain is not a dumb muscle. It's more like a brilliant creative director. It doesn't want to be hammered with information for hours on end. No, it thrives on rhythm, on context, and surprisingly, on downtime. A lot of our traditional hard work methods actually suppress its most powerful functions. Okay, so this first rule of the game might feel completely backward, but I promise, just stick with me here. We need to talk about forgetting. We always think of it as a failure, right? But what if I told you it's actually a critical feature of the learning process? This right here is the famous Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. And yeah, it shows that we lose a ton of new information very, very quickly. That looks pretty discouraging, but it's not the whole story. In fact, this rapid forgetting is exactly what makes long-term memory possible. And here's why. Think of your brain like a computer with, limited RAM. If it saved every single tiny detail of your day, it would just crash. So forgetting is the brain's automatic file cleaning system. It's clearing the cache of useless stuff to make room for what you signal is actually important. And this leads us to a brilliant concept called desirable difficulty. See, when a memory has faded just a little bit, your brain has to work harder to retrieve it. That struggle, that desirable difficulty, is like a workout for that specific memory. It tells your brain, hey, pay attention, this is important, and it strengthens that memory pathway. So forgetting and then recalling, that's the real key. So if struggling to remember is actually a good thing, how do we use that to our advantage? Well, let's move on to our next section, where we are going to bust some of the biggest myths about where and when we should be learning. We've all heard this advice, right? Find one quiet desk, your study zone, and use it every single time. Well, the science says that is terrible advice. Turns out, when you learn in different environments, your brain attaches the information to different contextual cues. The sounds, the smells, the lighting. This creates multiple retrieval paths to the exact same memory. And this effect isn't some small thing. One landmark study found that simply Look, we've all pulled the all-nighter, and sure, it might get you through the test, but that information vanishes almost instantly. That's because it totally ignores what's called the spacing effect. Spreading your learning out is exponentially more powerful. A single long cram session is like writing on sand. Spaced learning, that's like carving in stone. Now, what's really cool is that researchers have actually figured out the optimal review schedule for long-term retention. As you can see here, the best time for your first review really depends on when your test is. This system allows for that perfect amount of desirable difficulty we talked about, enough time to forget a little, but not so much that you have to start all over from scratch. All right, this next technique, it might be the most powerful one of all. We usually think of tests as a tool for assessment, to see what we know. But the science shows that testing is actually one of the best ways to learn in the first place. So let me ask you a kind of a wild question. What if you took the final exam on the very first day of class? Sounds crazy, right? You'd obviously fail. But what's amazing is that research shows the very act of trying to answer questions about stuff you haven't even learned yet actually primes your brain to learn it better later on. Just look at these results from a famous study. One group read a passage 4 times. The other group read it just once, but then they tested themselves on it 3 times. A week later, the testing group remembered nearly twice as much. See, rereading creates an illusion of knowing. It feels productive. But testing forces active recall, and that's what actually builds strong memories. So the crucial point is this. Every single time you try to retrieve a memory, you strengthen it. And listen, even getting an answer wrong is productive. It creates this mental hook, putting your brain into what you could call search mode. So when you finally see the correct answer, your brain just grabs onto it and goes, aha, that's what I was looking for. Okay, finally, let's talk about the learning tools we probably use the least but need the most. Interruptions, downtime, and a good night's sleep. Your brain doesn't stop working on a problem just because you do. It's got a night shift. This is something called the incubation effect. You know, when you're focused on a really tough problem and your brain just gets stuck, but when you step away, go for a walk, your brain's default mode network takes over and it starts connecting ideas in new ways in the background. That aha moment you have in the shower, that's not a miracle. That's just your brain finishing its homework while you relax. And the most powerful form of incubation, by far, is sleep. While you're sleeping, your brain is running its night shift. It's cleaning house, consolidating the important memories, and connecting all these scattered ideas. Deep sleep is crucial for locking in facts, while REM sleep is where your brain solves creative problems. Pulling an all-nighter is literally robbing your brain of its most important learning tool. So let's put it all together. Your new toolkit for smart learning is actually pretty simple. Embrace forgetting as a feature, not a bug. Change your study environment. Space out your learning sessions. Test yourself early and often. And please, let your brain do its thing while you rest. And this really brings us back to our central idea. Effective learning is not a battle you wage against your brain. It's about being brave enough to try these weird, counterintuitive strategies and smart enough to know when to relax and let your brain do its brilliant work in the background. So I'll leave you with this question. What could you achieve if you stopped fighting your brain and actually started collaborating with it? Just think about that. The possibilities are pretty much endless.